Welcome to today's story from the Wild West. A tale of dust, courage, and unexpected love. Stay with us as we begin the journey of a lonely rancher, and the widow who answered his notice. The noonday sun blazed high over Dust Creek, making the earth crack and shimmer. The little frontier town seemed half asleep under the weight of heat. Wooden storefronts creaked, shutters rattled faintly in the breeze, and a dog barked once before retreating into the shade. Down the dusty road walked Samuel Hartley, boots sinking into sand with each step. His shirt was faded, his hat pulled low, and in his hand, a single square of paper. Samuel was a man of few words, fewer friends, and years of silence. When he reached the town's message post, he lifted a hammer and nail. The sound of iron striking would rang out across the still air, sharp, clear, and final. He pinned up the paper, stepped back, and stared. The words were plain, without flourish. Cook wanted. Apply at Hartley Ranch. To a stranger, it was nothing more than a job notice. But for Samuel, that paper carried weight heavier than a bullet. For too many nights, he had sat in an empty house, eating cold beans by lantern light, speaking to no one. The ranch stretched wide, cattle roaming under the endless sky, but his world was small, his days as silent as the grave. This wasn't just a notice. It was his last attempt to bring some warmth back into his life, not love, not yet, but maybe the simple sound of pots clanging, the smell of bread baking, a human voice in the emptiness. He stood there longer than he needed to, watching the paper ripple in the wind. Townsfolk passed by, glancing with curiosity, but Samuel only tipped his hat and turned away, heading back toward the edge of town, never guessing who would answer. That same afternoon, the stillness of town broke with the rattle of wheels and the thunder of hooves. A stagecoach rolled in, its wooden frame groaning as it came to a stop. Dust billowed, and from the cloud stepped a woman and two children. Her name was Margaret Lane, though most folks called her Maggie. Her face carried both youth and hardship, the kind of beauty carved not from ease but from endurance. She wore a plain dress, patched at the hem, her hair pulled back with care though the journey had left it loose. At her side, a boy of 8 clutched her hand tightly. In her other arm, she steadied a younger girl, no more than 6. Their eyes were wide, cautious but curious, drinking in the foreign town. Maggie had buried a husband 3 years past. Life had offered her little mercy since. She read Samuel's notice days before, and though it spoke only of a cook, she read something more, a chance. Not for wealth, not for comfort, but for a roof, meals for her children, and perhaps a place to rest her weary spirit. She looked up the road, past the saloon doors swinging lazily, past the sheriff's office with its faded star, toward the horizon where the Hartley Ranch lay waiting. She straightened her back, tightened her grip on her children's hands, and stepped forward. A widow with little more than courage had come to answer the notice. The Hartley Ranch had long been a place of silence. The kitchen, once tended by Samuel's mother years ago, had fallen still. Pots hung untouched. The stove was cold more often than not. Bread pans sat empty, the air stale with dust and disuse. But when Maggie arrived, life returned like water to dry soil. She unpacked what little she had, a worn skillet, a bundle of herbs, a sewing needle and thread. Her hands were quick and sure. Soon, the kitchen rang with the scrape of iron pans, the bubbling of stew, the sweet smell of biscuits rising. Her children filled the house with laughter, their voices skipping through the halls, chasing each other through the yard. Samuel watched from a distance, uncertain, almost uneasy. He had grown used to silence, to his own company, to the creak of saddles and the lowing of cattle. He didn't know what to do with the sound of a child's giggle, or the hum of a woman singing softly while she kneaded dough. At supper, Samuel sat at the head of the table, shoulders stiff. Maggie served stew, set biscuits on the plate, and urged her children to mind their manners. The boy asked Samuel a dozen questions about cattle, horses, and guns. The girl offered him a flower she had picked near the well. Samuel's rough hands trembled as he accepted it. He didn't smile, Not yet, but inside, something long dormant stirred. His house was no longer hollow. It was alive. The days stretched on, long and hard. Samuel rose with the dawn, working the range until dusk. He mended fences, herded cattle, and rode the land that seemed to never end. His world was wide, yet for years it had felt empty. Now, when he returned, Maggie was there. Apron dusted with flour, hair loosened from the heat of the stove, she welcomed him with a nod and a meal. Her children, faces smudged with play, tumbled into his boots with stories of their adventures. The ranch began to change. Where once it stood quiet as a grave, it now pulsed with life. Chickens were chased across the yard by giggling children. Curtains, sewn from Maggie's careful hand, brightened the windows. Samuel caught himself lingering at the doorway, listening to the hum of voices, unwilling to break the spell. Neighbors noticed, too. Folks in town whispered that Hartley Ranch, once as silent as a tomb, now sang with the sound of family. Samuel, of course, said nothing. But when he lay his hat on the peg each night, the emptiness that had haunted him for years seemed a little less heavy. Night fell across Dust Creek like a heavy blanket. The stars spread wide and bright, scattered jewels on a canvas of black. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carried on the desert wind. At the Hartley Ranch, the house glowed faintly with lanterns, children tucked safely into bed, their breathing soft and steady. Outside, near the barn, Samuel built a fire. The flames licked upward, sparks flying into the sky. He sat on a rough log, shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on the embers. For years, he had sat alone on nights like this, talking to no one but the crackle of fire and the endless sky. This night was different. Maggie stepped outside, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. She lowered herself beside him, the firelight painting her face in soft gold. For a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind. Then, slowly, Samuel spoke. His voice was low, worn from disuse. He told her of the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow, years of riding fence lines alone, nights spent without a voice to answer his own. He spoke of burying his father, of shouldering the ranch, of how silence can weigh heavier than stone. Maggie listened, her eyes glistening in the firelight. When he finished, she told her story. She spoke of her husband, a kind man who had gone to war and never returned. She told of hunger, of the long nights when she cradled her children and prayed for strength. She spoke not with bitterness but with quiet courage. The fire popped, throwing sparks between them. And in that silence after her words, something shifted. Samuel no longer saw her only as his cook, nor as a widow with children. He saw her as a soul weathered by storms, scarred but unbroken, much like himself. They didn't touch, didn't speak further. But as the flames burned low, both felt the unspoken truth. In their brokenness, they had found a reflection of each other. Morning came with a sharp wind. Samuel was in the yard, tightening a saddle, when the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the plains. He paused, squinting against the sun. A line of riders appeared on the horizon, dust rising like a storm behind them. At their head rode Elias Grant, a man whose name carried weight across the territory. He was a cattle baron, known for swallowing smaller ranches whole, leaving ruin in his wake. He wore a black hat, his coat fine, his mustache trimmed. Behind him, a half-dozen men followed, rifles slung low. They rode hard into the yard, the thunder of hooves shaking the ground. Elias dismounted with a sneer. "Hartley," he called, voice like gravel. "This land of yours sits right where I want to run my herds. Sell it now, or you'll regret standing in my way." Samuel straightened, meeting his gaze. His hand rested near his belt, though his pistol stayed holstered. "This ranch isn't for sale." From the porch, Maggie watched, her children clinging to her skirts. Fear flickered in her chest, but she held steady. She had faced men like this before, men who believed power gave them the right to take what wasn't theirs. Elias stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Think on it, Hartley. I don't make offers twice." He spat in the dirt, mounted his horse, and with a jerk of his reins, led his men away. Dust swallowed them, leaving the yard silent again. But that silence carried a weight. Trouble had arrived, and it would not leave quietly. That evening, the barn was heavy with the scent of hay and horses. A lantern swung gently, its glow casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Samuel paced the floor, jaw tight, hands restless. Maggie entered quietly, arms folded. "You're planning something," she said. "I'll send you and the children into town," Samuel replied, his voice firm. "It's safer there. Grant won't stop until he takes what he wants. I won't have you caught in it." Maggie shook her head. "No." Samuel stopped, stunned. "No." She stepped closer, her eyes steady. "I've run enough, Mr. Hartley. I ran when the soldiers came for my husband. I ran when hunger forced me from one town to the next. My children deserve more than running. They deserve roots. If trouble comes, I'll face it here, with you." Her words struck deeper than a bullet. Samuel had seen bravery on the range, in men who stood against storms and stampedes. But Maggie's courage was different, quiet, fierce, born not from pride but from love. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He only looked at her, lantern light flickering in her eyes. And in that barn, with the horses shifting restlessly in their stalls, Samuel realized something he hadn't before: this woman wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for a future. And somehow, that future now included him. Word travels fast in the West. By the next morning, the town of Dust Creek buzzed with whispers. Elias Grant had challenged Samuel Hartley, and the showdown would come at noon. The sun rose high, baking the earth. Townsfolk lined the wooden porches, peering from behind shutters, waiting. The air was thick, charged with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Samuel walked the street, boots steady, hat low, pistol at his side. His heart pounded, but his stride never faltered. He thought of his father, of the ranch, of the children's laughter that had filled his house again. He thought of Maggie, her fire, her courage, and knew this fight was no longer about land. It was about protecting what had finally become his family. Elias stood at the far end, black hat casting shadow over his cold eyes. His hand hovered near his gun. "You're a fool, Hartley," he called. Samuel said nothing. The wind stirred dust between them. Then, in a flash, hands moved, pistols cleared leather, and gunfire shattered the silence. The sound echoed like thunder through the streets. When the dust settled, Elias Grant lay sprawled in the dirt, his reign ended in the very town he sought to control. Samuel lowered his smoking gun, breath heavy but eyes clear. Justice had spoken, swift and final. The townsfolk exhaled, relief spreading through the crowd. The showdown was over, but for Samuel, the true battle, the fight for love, for family, had only just begun. That night, Dust Creek was alive with celebration. The saloon glowed with lantern light, laughter spilling out into the street. The piano played a lively tune, boots stomping in rhythm, mugs clinking in cheer. In the corner, Samuel sat, quiet as ever, hat tipped low. He wasn't a man of crowds, but he couldn't deny the warmth that filled the room. Trouble had passed, at least for now. Then, at the urging of her children, Maggie stepped onto the small stage. She hesitated, cheeks flushed, before nodding to the piano man. When she began to sing, the room fell silent. Her voice was soft at first, trembling like a breeze through grass. But soon it grew, strong and steady, carrying words of hope, of love, of endurance. It wasn't just a song. It was her story, her struggles, her strength, her faith that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Samuel's chest tightened as he listened. He had faced storms, droughts, and gunfire, but nothing struck him as deeply as that voice. It wrapped around him, unarmored him, made him feel more than he had in years. The crowd cheered when she finished, but Samuel didn't move. He only watched her, heart heavy with something he could no longer deny. The next morning, the sun rose golden over the plains. The horizon stretched wide and endless, the land bathed in light. Samuel saddled his horse, as he had done 1,000 times before. But this morning was different. Maggie was beside him, her children already mounted, laughter spilling into the crisp air. She adjusted her bonnet, smiled, and met his gaze with quiet certainty. They rode together, hooves drumming against the earth. Samuel in the lead, Maggie at his side, the children chasing after butterflies in the morning breeze. For the first time in years, the rancher wasn't riding into silence. He wasn't riding alone. The notice he had nailed on a post, just a few plain words, had brought more than a cook to his home. It had brought life, laughter, and love. And as the sun climbed higher, Samuel Hartley and Margaret Lane rode forward into a future neither had dared to dream. Not as a lonely rancher and a widowed mother, but as a family, bound by love, forged in dust, and carried onward by hope. Thank you for watching this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.